It's on? Great. Okay, we're ready to go. So with the first part of this, 10 minutes, Piers Corbyn. Thank you.
Hello. Pleased to see you, and I blame the lack of the correct PowerPoint to British Rail or somebody. Maybe I made a mistake loading something, I don't know. But anyway, we do have a PDF of the stuff, but it's not openable in the form we want. So this is a similar presentation I gave at University College London earlier this year. And there are some extra slides missing, which will be available in the full presentation, which will be on our website and presumably on Merthyr Rising website when I send it to the right people. Okay, well, I'm Piers Corbyn, brother of. He used to be my brother, now I'm his brother. I'm a scientist, studied at Imperial College, got a first-class degree, started science when I was 5 years old. And next slide, please, or just flash past the next slew slides because we don't have time for them. Are you flashing slides? Next slide. There we are. We'll just go through those. And the next one, it just shows things I've done, including weather bets with William Hill, where we won consistently to prove the accuracy of the solar weather technique of long-range forecasting, or the solar lunar action technique. In the course of my political activity, some years ago, I was involved in the miners' strike support campaigns, of course, which would be dear to your hearts in Wales. And without that, of course, I probably wouldn't be here, because I carried on doing research into it because people wanted to know was it going to be a cold winter in 84, 85, and it was. I told them it was, and that was right. So then I carried on the research and got the long-range forecasting I'm doing. Okay, you can read that stuff at your leisure. Next one, and the next one. There we are. Just a little picture. You've probably seen this before. And next one, please, as well, because it's a side one. This is to show you that things are not always what they seem. You can write equations in physics, but it doesn't mean they represent reality. Here we have a picture of water flowing uphill. And you can see it is water flowing uphill. Look at it, it's going uphill. Anyway, there's the water. See, it's going uphill and it comes down again. It's going round and round. Wonderful, isn't it? But if you try and build that, you can't. All right, next slide, please. Right, now you've probably heard that 97% of climate scientists, or scientists in general, believe in man-made climate change. Well, that is a false statement, and it's also irrelevant. It's irrelevant because what counts in science isn't what people think or opinions or the qualifications of anybody. It is whether or not the real evidence meets the theory. And if it doesn't, the theory is wrong. What we have is this narrative, and we live in an era of imposed false narratives, this narrative that 97% of scientists believe something, therefore it's true. Well, the actual facts of the documentation is that about 0.3% of scientists insist they have evidence which shows man is doing things. The others put man-made climate change or climate change into the headline of their research in order to get funding. 4 points to understand. First of all, actual data shows that carbon dioxide levels are an effect of temperatures, not a cause of temperatures. Carbon dioxide levels follow temperatures, and this has been true for millions of years. Secondly, if man's carbon dioxide rules, since man only produces 4% of the carbon dioxide flux in and out of the atmosphere, man's 4% has to be followed by termites who produce 10 times more CO2 than man. If termites and others do not follow man, then man doesn't rule. So what we have is a conspiracy of nature theory here, where nature has to follow mankind. Now, there's been a lot of theories of the world or universe following mankind before, and they've all shown to be not true. This is another one which is not true. The sea rules because it's sea temperatures which control the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. If you warm up the sea, CO2 comes off. If you put CO2 into the atmosphere, it'll go into the sea, unless the sea is too warm. To cool the sea and it will take in more. And the fourth point is that The extremes we're seeing now are the wrong type of extremes for the man-made climate change theory. Because the man-made climate change theory says the jet stream, which is this rapid, this is the globe, rapid motion of air around in a wavy pattern around the globe. When the jet stream moves further north, that means the cold bit is smaller and the warm bit below it is bigger. That is a warmer world, and that is what we need for man-made climate change. What we've had, though, is the jet stream has moved south recently because of low solar activity and become more wavy, which it can do if it's longer and further south. So we have a scenario of the jet stream which is completely contrary to the man-made climate change theory. What we have is a theory fitting in with global cooling from solar activity, and it has happened before. And we warned in 2008 it would happen. How many minutes have we got?
3.5.
Well, he says 4. Okay, next one.
Piers, I'm the chair. 3.5.
Okay, we've had very cold winters recently, or a very cold winter, and extremely cold spring. Next one, please. In the last 10,000 years of the interglacial period of general warming, we've had 9 warm bursts, all of which have been warmer than this one. We're at number 10. Next, please. The predictions of the IPC of 0.6 degrees centigrade rise, according to satellite measurements, is untrue. There's been no rise according to satellite measurements in the last 10 years. Next one. Next one, this is the same sort of thing. What they did then, the IPCC and NASA, is started to fiddle data. So they don't necessarily fiddle the original data, but they modify the averages. And here we have American stations. The measured is the blue, and the reported, so-called final adjusted, is below. They reduced temperatures in the past and increased them present by about a 0.5 degrees centigrade of fraud. Next one. That's showing the 0.5 centigrade fraud, which you can see on the website later on. Next one. Just to show you that we're told that the last recent warming has been very rapid, which is true, but it's not new, because 60 years before, the same warming happened, and 60 years before that. This 60-year cycle is something we predict from the solar lunar action technique. Next one. All the propositions of the climate change theory, man-made, since 2000 have failed. All of them. All of them. That means the end of a theory, okay? Unless you fiddle the data. Just to show you, we've had big levels of CO2 in the past, millions of years. There's not a relationship between CO2 and climate on these time scales. The relationship happens in the next slide. Or so, yeah, you are. In a time range of 100 to 1,000 years, carbon dioxide levels follow temperatures. Here we have Antarctic temperatures going up, then CO2 levels went up. The 800-year lag, or 500, that sort of thing, would indicate that the CO2 now is a product of the medieval warm period. Okay, next one. Next one. We said that already. We got the wrong type of extremes for the theory. Next one. What to expect? We predicted a lot of these things. Very rapid changes, loads of hail. This has happened. We warned of this 10 years ago. Next one. This is under the solar theory. This is an average of solar activity, which is a good measure on spread out data of world temperatures. 221 years apart, these two traces, we are here on this one. So we haven't got to there yet. That's a prediction, assuming it follows what it did 221 years ago. We're here and we're heading for here. So we're heading for general cooling. We've already started the process. A new, more than minimum solar activity, if you like. Next one. Has the theory been any use to anybody? Well, first of all, it doesn't actually reduce carbon dioxide production, because what's happened is we've had the deindustrialisation of the north and of Wales, which have moved CO2 production to India. And we've paid for it because of the EU rules making us pay for everything. And it's pushed up energy and oil prices and emasculated the left from being anti-nuke to pro-nuke and so on. Okay, we'll round off if you go to the next one. We're almost there anyway. We can discuss the details there, why the big oil backs the climate change theory because they make money out of it. Next one, fails of climate change physics. We can discuss that later. Next one, which is, and then the next one will be the end, are plenty of false, fake green processes around, such as Drax Power Station, which makes more pollution than the coal would, and it's equivalent to increasing the number of diesel cars by 25% because of that wood smoke that comes out. And the next one, which I think is the last one, well, after that, if you go to the actual next slide, or the next slide after that, the next one is it must be the last one. There we are. This is what you've got to do. You've got to enjoy life. You agree with that? It's Wales. You've got to accept that man can't change the climate. You've got to stop all these mad carbon tax schemes. But you do have to keep honest, true green policies, such as defending biodiversity. And you might even use long-range forecasts. But basically, what we're in is an era of a struggle between accountability versus Wall Street-driven globalisation. So I say join accountability for a revolution in science and politics. Thank you.
So, thank you everybody. Now, so that was Piers Corbyn, and I would have introduced Piers as a weather forecaster and businessman, and the slides you saw were entitled Weather Action, which is your company, correct?
Correct, weatheraction.com.
So any information you want will be available on that website, so Weather Action. I'll introduce you to Professor Nick Pigeon now, who works as an academic on risk perception and risk communication at Cardiff University. He also did 6 years at the University of East Anglia at the School of Environmental Sciences, and he's an environmental scientist. Nick, would you like to come in response to what you've seen?
I will, yeah, thank you. And Borodar, good morning. Thank you for everybody coming today. I'm not a climate scientist myself. I do have a degree in mathematics way back there, but I'm a social scientist now working on public understanding of environmental issues. But as Steve has said, I've worked for a long time and I have still continued to work with some of the best climate scientists in the country. To me, this is a defunct debate. It's astonishing that in 2018 we're actually still arguing about it. It's a bit like if 80 years ago we sat here and we were arguing whether being down the mines actually caused lung disease or not, or if we sat here 40 years ago and argued whether smoking caused cancer or not, against all the evidence that was there at the time. Political point, what unites those two questions with climate change? It's because powerful corporate interests, primarily currently the fossil fuel lobby, are seeking to deny and have sought to deny the scientific evidence for a number of years now. And why? Because it's against their interest. So from a science perspective, let's go back to that. There's no question about three things. Climate change is happening. It's primarily due to us. And that can be difficult to admit sometimes because there are so many of the things we do and the things that make up our identity as people is associated with the use of fossil fuels currently. And it is going to be bad if we don't act now. And also, it is absolutely correct, there is a clear consensus amongst climate scientists that climate change is happening and it's due to anthropogenic emissions. Let's do a little experiment now, have a little vote. How many people think that forget what Piers said for a minute. Before you came into the room, how many people here thought that over 50% of climate scientists agreed that climate science was that climate change was happening? About half. Okay.
It's an opinion about an opinion.
I'm sorry.
That's not what he's asking for.
That's not a very good question.
Well, no, I'll come on to that. So, what about over 80%? Who thought of over 80%?
Well, I know that they think it.
About a third, and that actually.
Audience, we'll take contributions later. Thank you.
That actually is clear with polling we do. Most people don't actually think there's a consensus on climate science, when in fact there is. And that is indication of some of the misinformation that has been put out about this issue over the last 10 to 15 years. And it's not to say anybody's wrong, or it's not to blame anybody for it, but the false beliefs get out there. Why do scientists agree on this? We've known the basic physical mechanisms for about 150 years now. The greenhouse effect keeps the planet warmer, 30 degrees warmer than it would otherwise be, so we wouldn't be here if we didn't have carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And that small extra 3% has raised that blanket that keeps the planet warm, and that's what's leading to the warming of about 1 degree over the last 150 years. So, what does the evidence show? Global temperatures are warmer by about 1 degree over 150 years across the globe as a whole. Snow is less, ice melt is more. That we've had rising sea levels by about 20 centimetres since 1950, and the oceans are more acidic, something called ocean acidification, which affects marine environments. The human contribution is beyond reasonable doubt. That's due to the basic physics. Emissions lead to a rise in greenhouse gases, and it's absolutely incorrect to say that CO2 and temperature are the other way around. It is rising CO2 and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which is leading to the current rapid temperature increase. It's impossible to describe it or to understand it through natural cycles. You cannot explain the current level of warming that I've just described without emissions. There is no other reasonable explanation. For example, it's been said that the sun has been getting brighter and therefore that explains the recent warming, and that's not true because scientists monitor the sun all the time. And in fact, the sun has been getting less bright over the last 30 years or so. So, what you've got is a situation of more energy, more heat going into the globe as a whole, and that will lead to more extreme events. In the UK and Wales in particular, certainly in the short term, we'll be vulnerable, and you'll have seen this on the news, to more flooding and extreme storms. They'll become more frequent and they'll become more heavy when they happen. At the east of the country, East Anglia, there'll be more drought and crops potentially will fail. In the UK, we can probably deal with it because we're a rich nation and we'll be able to adapt in appropriate ways. But in other places, France and Spain, they'll have severe droughts. In Africa, crops will fail in a very severe way, and populations will have to move. And islands in the Pacific and elsewhere that are very low lying currently will be inundated. Now, what I'm going to say is, while the basic science is firm, we can absolutely disagree about what the solutions are. And I think that's where the debate should be now, and it'd be interesting your views on this as we go along. So should we have more renewable energy in the valleys? That's one question. Should we have less dependence on imports of finite oil and gas? Should we have electric cars and trains throughout this region, which would be great, I think. It would certainly cut traffic pollution as well, and effects on people's health. Should we have more nuclear power? That's another question that's been put out there by some environmentalists, interestingly, as well. And should we take less foreign holidays? Because one of the major contribution to your personal footprint, if you fly at all, is flights. Just back to the politics, and then I'll finish. 6 minutes, 7 minutes, that's great. I'm doing okay, aren't I? Yeah. Lots of time for questions. A little point. In the United States, and it's not exactly the same here, and this is coming back into my area of public understanding of science, there are some very extreme sceptical views, and you can pretty well predict somebody's view on climate change by asking them who they vote for. So if you vote Republican broadly, or if you're a very strong Republican, not a moderate Republican, actually, interestingly, but a strong Republican, you will deny climate change or say climate change isn't caused by us. Whereas if you're on the Democrat side, broadly, you will say, yes, it's a problem, it has to be dealt with. And why has that come about? Well, it's very interesting to look back. Political scientists have looked at this in great detail. The polling shows this, that during about 1995, the second Clinton-Gore administration, the Republicans realised that Gore was an environmentalist, so they decided that one of the points of attack would be the environment and would be climate change. So a concerted campaign against Al Gore at that time as vice president around the issue of climate change was put into place. I would have brought the graphs with me. You can see it very clearly. Up until that point, the US population agreed entirely on whether climate change was happening or not, whether you voted Republican or Democrat. From that point onwards, the graph diverges completely. So that today there's about a 20-point difference in the views, depending on whether you're a Democrat voter or a Republican voter, and that's entirely due to the misinformation that was put out by the Republican Party. And of course, they were in cahoots, I'm sure, with a number of right-wing think tanks who wanted to argue this case, and at that time, large oil and large gas and large coal interests in the US. So, I'll finish. We're in South Wales. A number of us, not just here in Cardiff University or in South Wales University, Swansea Universities, the major universities in South Wales, believe there's a huge green energy future in South Wales, whether it's the Swansea Barrage, whether it's renewable energy out here, whether it's issues of reforestation and reclaiming the environment in the South Wales region. Huge potential to contribute to this coming energy revolution. So I would put to you a genuinely radical social and environmental agenda embraces a clean energy future and a planet that we can all enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I'd like to start the discussion with this statement, and it's from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which says that scientific evidence for warming of the climate system is unequivocal. So that word unequivocal is. So can I ask you to respond to that? The evidence is unequivocal.
Well, the IPCC is from the United Nations, which is also the one which reduced to the weapons of mass destruction to justify the Iraq war. What the IPCC says is untrue, and they work to actually modify and change data anyway. If you look at actual data, unmodified, for example, the biggest heat waves in the US of A happened in the 1930s, not now. And specifically on the issue of consensus, that is totally irrelevant. Consensus has never advanced science. You should ask Galileo that question. The consensus led to tortures. And now we have a consensus, so-called, in the universities, which has resulted in a professor being expelled from the Cook University in the US of A because he's challenged the false claims made about the coral reef. But specifically on points that have just been made by the other speaker, we were told by the IPCC, unequivocal evidence or argument, there would be the end of snow in Europe. We've had more snow. We were also told that we could be growing vineyards everywhere. Well, a lot of people have lost money in investing in vineyards. It's a complete nonsense. And the point about acidification, so-called, of the oceans is also nonsense, even in their own physical theories. Because if you're warming, as they claim, warming the ocean, that will drive off gases, including carbon dioxide, and make less CO2 in the oceans, not more.
Piers, can I bring Nick in?
Sure.
This idea that consensus hasn't always been, for example, in history we have heliocentrism wasn't a thing because the consensus was against it. So how do you answer that claim?
Well, I think science operates in two ways. That clearly scientists are interested in uncertainty and in removing uncertainty from an issue. So there are lots of issues in science where there isn't consensus. One could name all sorts of science questions, but the way it does work and the way we make advances, the way all this equipment works, because we understand how electricity works, the way I got here on the train from Cardiff today, the way probably some of you came here in your car, is you narrow down the uncertainties over time and eventually a consensus forms about the theory of electricity or whatever, the operation of electricity. And you have to realise that climate change has moved from that early period that Piers is talking about, where everybody argued about what was happening, and lots of people did lots of measurements and tried to work it out. And broadly there's an agreement. So I go back to the smoking and cancer analogy. The same right-wing think tanks wanted to deny there was a link between smoking and cancer 40 years ago. And there was a clear consensus under the that the medics had, and they were absolutely correct. And the same situation pertains here now in relation to climate change and the vast majority of climate scientists across the globe. It would be very difficult to get a genuine climate scientist who publishes in the peer-reviewed literature and puts their ideas up to peer review, who would come here and say what Piers has just said.
Well, but there
Piers.
aren't any climate scientists who are prepared to debate, or very, very rarely, because
could I ask-
they do not have the facts backing up their theory. So I repeat,
no,
I
I
ask
disagree.
Nick,
No, I
where's
disagree.
the evidence for your claims?
I fully-
Where's the absence of snow?
Okay,
Where's
Piers.
the absence
I
of snow?
disagree with that, because one of the reasons why climate scientists don't like coming to meetings like this is they feel very intimidated because they're making a political argument and they're trying to put a policy argument. That is not what they went into climate science to do. They went into science to measure the ocean temperature or to look at the behaviour of organisms under temperature. And they absolutely, they're
I
very
know some
wary
who
about
admit it's
it.
rubbish and they're after the money.
Piers, just can you talk a little bit? I mean, you're in business essentially,
Yeah.
aren't you? And you make money from your forecasts.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you about if you think what your predictions are doing in terms of the political debate. Donald Trump, for example, has stated that climate change was a Chinese hoax. Aren't you giving the right wing their ammunition to further their agenda?
Look, if Donald Trump agrees with me, that's his problem. On the issue related of the oil companies and interests, I'll tell you quite an illustrative little story. 2004, I was invited to the Global Oil Summit at Houston, Texas, by the oil companies. I didn't know why they wanted me, because I hadn't been involved with them. I went there and gave a presentation showing it's the sun what does it, i.e. graphs and the like. Afterwards, a guy comes up to me and says, "Oh, Mr. Corbyn, this is really interesting. Just to show you, we're on the same page." And he produced a wad of literature with graphs in it showing, similar to what I'd said, namely that the sun rules. And then I said, "Oh, that's nice. By the way," and there's quite a small meeting of super duper tops. I said, "By the way, who are you?" He said, "Oh, I'm retiring at this meeting, but I'm the chief executive of Exxon Mobil." Right. 3 months later, friends of mine said, "Piers," or actually 1 month later, "why don't you ask those guys for money?" I said, "Oh God, I don't want to get mixed up with the oil lobby." And they said, "Yeah, but you could ask the IPCC, the UN, for money too, and have balanced funding." So we did both. We asked the oil companies, would they fund our research on that understanding? It was, equal funding from all sides. They came straight back and said, "No, we do not want to upset the green lobby." That's what the oil companies said, and read their websites. They're very clear. They support the theory of man-made climate change so long as there are measures against carbon, making a uniform price for carbon across the board, which means keeping the price high enough so farmers can make money by burning food instead of selling it to eat. So they're holding up oil price through OPEC and all other things, and that is their main driver. And if you noticed, when Donald Trump announced withdrawing from the Paris Accord, there was one member of his cabinet who didn't agree. That was Rex Tillerson, the former new, not the one I met, but the new chief executive of Exxon Mobil. They know where their interests are, and it's not with me, it's with the climate change hoax.
Nick, the green lobby is a hoax and a conspiracy? What do you say?
I'm not sure. We're not debating about the green lobby. I mean, I'm not speaking here for Friends of the Earth or whoever. And there are lots of wonderful examples of environmental groups putting out things that aren't entirely correct. Because they're in a political struggle, just like the left and the right are in a political struggle, just like the oil companies are in a political struggle. I think you have to recognise that for what it is, agree with it or not. What I would say is we are debating whether the climate science says this is the case or not, and climate scientists do not have a political agenda. They're interested in ferreting out the truth about this issue, and in I think every sense of the word, they've been able to do that, and we should trust scientists to actually work for us in the public interest. And on the oil companies, again, go back to the smoking example. The tobacco companies knew this was killing people long before. So although they put out the message that there was no link, they were preparing for the future, and actually one of the preparations was to sort of move their markets somewhere else where it would be easier to sell cigarettes, which is what and where they get less regulation, which is what they've successfully done. So the oil companies know this is happening as well. They've got the best scientists working for them as well. They would be stupid to deny it. And in fact, actually, they're almost certainly preparing for a different energy future. They'd certainly be stupid not to be preparing for a different energy future. And I know many of them are. They're looking at renewable energy, they're looking at solar energy, they're looking at all the ways that energy efficiency can be applied, so that we're not burning and using up actually what is a very valuable resource. Fossil fuels make medicines, they make plastics, they make all sorts of things that are really, really useful. We wouldn't want to just deplete them by burning them. So I mean, burn food, that's a terrible thing, but actually burning oil is a terrible thing as well.
Yeah. We're running out of time. We've got 15 minutes left, so I want to bring the audience in. One final question from me to you both.
Okay.
In the reading I've done on this, there's been a spike in global warming since the Industrial Revolution, which does point to man-made activity.
I've got the graph.
Okay.
There you go. Brian Cox, the physicist, famous scientist, was showing it the other day on YouTube in a very similar debate in Australia. Worth going to have a look at, actually. There we go.
Thank you. So, my question to you, Piers, is this to me, it seems like quite compelling scientific evidence that man-made activity, man's activity has indeed made a change. How can you convince us that it hasn't?
Well, there's a lot of things that have happened in the last 30 years, one of which the readership of the Sun newspaper has gone up. But I don't think that, or it might have gone down now, but I don't think that is a cause of anything. Association is not cause. I showed you a graph earlier of the last 9 previous warming cycles in the last 10,000 years. And all of them were warmer than this. There is one just happening or happened now, which probably peaked around 2003, 2004, and now we're in a period of cooling. And the North Atlantic is cooled very considerably in the last 10 years. And one of the graphs in the missing presentation, which will be available, shows that. The Industrial Revolution was merely a coincidence of no relevance whatsoever in changing climate, and that is very specifically shown by, for example, the rate of sea level rise, which is slow but happening because since the last ice age the sea is slowly expanding. The rate of sea level rise, which is slow, did not change at all before and after the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. There's no effect whatsoever of man-made or any carbon dioxide on climate. I repeat, the effect is the other way, and actual scientific data shows that, and I challenge Nick to refute the million years of data which shows that CO2 levels follow world temperatures.
Well, I mean that you just have to take the view that is just not correct. The evidence currently shows that carbon dioxide is going up in the oceans, it's going up in the oceans, it's going up in the atmosphere, and warming is happening as well. Nothing is following, nothing in the way has been described.
Those aren't true either. Temperatures are going up and down when carbon dioxide has been steadily rising. That's the actual fact.
Nick, do you think there's any validity to Piers's methods, science, if you call it that? Any validity to it?
If there was validity to it, smart scientists would be agreeing with him, and I see very few people doing that.
They are agreeing with him.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Look,
it's a question of opinion polling. Nonsense.
I personally put my science to peer review. Sometimes people pick me
I've
up
got
and
many
say,
peer-reviewed publications.
Sometimes,
thank you.
Yeah, but have you got any on climate science?
Yes.
In a legitimate climate science journal?
Yes.
And can you name one?
Yes.
And what is it?
No.
Can you?
They're on the website.
Can you name the journal?
No, come on.
Yes.
I can list a whole bunch of papers I published.
Yeah.
Quite now.
That's a fair question, Piers. Can you name one
absolutely.
journal?
I can. It was a peer-reviewed thing by the professor at University of Sunderland in the astrophysics and physical sciences. I can't remember the precise title, but it is on our website, and he did a test of our long-range forecasts. in a project funded by the insurance companies to find out if they were accurate, and it showed that 5 out of the 5 biggest insurance loss periods in the time concerned were predicted by us and our storm forecast from up to 2 years ahead.
That was specifically about forecasting, am I right? And not about the theory of climate change. Is that right?
Well, I've had some published about theory of climate change and what's wrong with, good ideas and bad ideas about in importance or not of CO2.
Okay.
And that was published, and again, the reference is on our website.
Thanks, Piers.
You can find them all.
We're going to open it up to the audience now. Can you indicate if you? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So at the top.
Hello. I would have to confess I'm not very well read on this subject, and I probably have been swayed by everything that we hear, in the media, that there is global warming, and it is as a result of what we're doing and our industrialisation and our sort of driving millions of diesel cars. And this has broadened my view slightly and made me realise that I do need to explore this further. But could it be a natural phenomena in terms of the fact that tens of thousands of years ago this planet had an ice age, and we had temperatures rising, and we had an increase in carbon dioxide, and the ice age came to an end? Could that phenomenon could we still be experiencing a form of that now, and it's coinciding with our huge industrialisation and our driving of diesel cars? Could it just be coincidental? And it is a natural thing that's happening, and we're just blaming it on what we're doing.
Okay. Can I take the second question as well, and we'll answer it in two then. So, Tanya, it's down here on the chap in the white t-shirt.
Yeah, I was going to ask about if there's a possibility of any sort of unified theory coming out of this, or are we just talking about two paradigms which are completely incommensurable? From that sort of perspective, I mean, is there a crucial database which can sort of clinch this? The point being, I mean, science is often criticised because scientists have a tendency to find what they're looking for, what they don't. If they come up with stuff which don't fit in, they have a tendency to ignore it. So what are the chances for some sort of unified theory based on a convincing set of data?
Okay, so question one was about the topic. So question one was about the topic. Can you answer that succinctly? Is it possible that it's a cyclical thing? And the second question is any chance of a unified theory?
Okay, very quickly. Is it a cyclical thing? Yes, it is. 1 million years of data show that. An understanding of these cycles enable us to predict many things. For example, the heat wave that's coming at the end of this month, we predicted that some months ahead. And we can also predict many things a long time ahead. The role of CO2, no, it's zero. CO2 is an effect, not a cause. The point about unification of the paradigms, as you put it, well, the CO2 theory is dead in the water, but numerical forecasting and standard meteorology, and what I do, there are many possibilities in the future for unification and improving short-range forecasts by or medium-range ones by using inputs from our theories of solar influence. And I can tell you that there are some standard meteorologists who are extremely interested in moving forward on these matters with us. And in 5 years' time, the CO2 theory will be completely forgotten anyway.
Okay, thank you. Nick?
Well, I'll say several things about that. The first thing, actually, I should have said earlier. I mean, you have to be quite careful with some of the things Piers is saying, because in places he's conflating weather and climate, and they're not the same thing. That's a major mistake. Climate is average weather over a 20-year period.
This is ideological.
Whereas what happens tomorrow is not direct evidence of climate change per se. You have to take scientific measurements into account. Could it be a natural phenomena? If it was, there would be people who would have worked that one out, because all cycles have been looked at. Generally, they occur over very, very long periods of time, thousands of years. What's the issue now is this warming is occurring very rapidly, probably too rapidly for animals and species to actually adapt if, as the predictions are correct, we're going to a 2-degree world or beyond. Is there a unified theory? There's a simple answer to that. Yes, there is, and it sits with the body of climate science, and it's as solid a scientific theory as you can get, and that's all I can say on that matter.
Thank you, Nick. Take a third question now.
Yeah, I guess as an organizer, I mean, I'm not qualified to judge one way or the other, but I mean, certainly what I've observed over the last, say, 40 years is the whole climate debate kind of swamping environmentalism, so that, you know, we're not talking about how basically we're facing biochemical breakdown, all right? You know, whether it's, you know, pollution from you know, in the Niger Delta, whether it's, you know, and one thing that doesn't really get talked about is the environmental cost of these things. You know, that an iPhone, the parts for an iPhone actually travel the same distance to the moon and back, all right, before they actually get into our hands. And there are massive, you know, in the Congo in particular, and other places, there are really massive struggles over the extraction of the materials needed for batteries. So, I'm not sure I have a question. I guess my big question is, like, why are we not trying to replicate photosynthesis as a major priority?
Some people are,
So,
actually. No,
anyway.
absolutely some people are. Sorry, can I?
But it's,
Yeah.
but sorry, my point really with my point really with the environmental stuff is that, you know, I remember in the 70s we were fighting, you know, local battles against pollution, that there was no question over whether the science was right or not. It was not based on a computer model. And, you know, it's this whole climate thing is just kind of suck the energy out of those sorts of, you know, local battles that people can win.
Yeah, sorry. I got too excited trying to answer the second bit of your question. No, I was nodding because I absolutely agree with what you've just said at the start. I think climate change has sort of sucked the energy from other pressing issues. Think about urban air quality and the health impacts of that. That's as equally pressing in some places here and elsewhere. Yes, that's right, in a number of places. The point about materials and overuse of resources is absolutely correct, that people who do the analysis of exploitation of materials and the Earth's resources show that we're running low on all sorts of things, aside from the energy question. And what's interesting about that is there's a link between the two. There's a lot of discussion of co-benefits. So, for example, if we're able to make iPhones here with less materials and not ship them from China or wherever they're being made currently, then you'd save energy, so that would help with climate change, but it would also help with resource depletion issues as well. So you do need a coordinated approach so that you're not doing one thing that's making something worse. I think that's absolutely true. But there are lots of examples of where two benefits can be got through one intervention, and one would be, you know, the change to electric vehicles, which is going to happen here, and it will improve people's health in towns like this, but it will also help with climate change.
Piers, too much focus on climate.
Yes, absolutely. A very good question. I think the carbon dioxide religion is used by the biggest investors, the biggest corporations, to make money. We all got the Drax power station where they're busy poisoning people and destroying forests in America to bring the pellets here and producing miles and miles of extra pollution in the atmosphere. We have a plan from the International Monetary Fund and the United Nations to build dozens of dams in the Amazon basin. There shall be destruction of life in the Amazon basin, destruction of the indigenous tribes, and it'll actually produce more methane than the carbon dioxide they're saving. It is purely a money-making operation in the name of saving the planet, and it has to be opposed absolutely. And when you get hold of the proper presentation, go to slide 27, where we analyse a lot of these fake green versus true green policies. And beware, go for true green and reject the CO2 con. Thank you.
Any more questions before we wrap up? Any more in the front? Gentleman here.
Hi. Geoengineering. In 2008, the UK Parliament published a paper where it discussed the regulation of solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injections, and the like. Can you address the matter whether this has actually been going on in UK skies for the last 10 years?
Yeah, I can certainly answer that. As far as I know, it's not been going on. It's a very interesting report. The Royal Society produced it, and there are two geoengineering approaches. One's called solar radiation management, where you're trying to change the radiation balance, in some way stopping a small fraction of sunlight coming in. The second one, which is much more important actually for Wales and elsewhere, is called greenhouse gas reduction or negative emission technology, where you're trying to take carbon dioxide and other gases out of the atmosphere. Now, the solar radiation management certainly not been going on, and I think there's a broad consensus that this would have to be an emergency measure. There's no other way to look at it, and really it's in the realm of science fiction. We wouldn't know what it would do to weather patterns. Even Piers, I'm sure, would agree with that. The arguments might be it might switch off the monsoon or something like that if you're trying to kind of dim the brightness of the sun coming in. So I think that has been pushed aside. But there's a lot of focus now on that second side of geoengineering, whether it's feasible or not, is to use techniques to take carbon out of the atmosphere. The simplest one actually would be to plant loads of trees across Wales and then use that wood in the construction industry across the UK, and that would be a good way of contributing and taking carbon out of the atmosphere and using it in a useful way and creating jobs.
Thanks, Nick. Piers?
There has been historically an amount of geoengineering, but what's been going on has been greatly exaggerated, in my opinion. The Lynmouth disaster in southwest England was caused by playing around with dropping either silver iodide or solid CO2 into the atmosphere in a big cloud, and that led to torrential rain and those floods in Lynmouth, and many people killed in 1953. In China, they do use geoengineering to try and make rain fall in the places they want it to fall when there's a cloud around. But it's all pretty hit and miss, and I think what we're told in the certain media, alternative media, about it is greatly exaggerated. But make no mistake, the military on all sides are up to weather control as a weapon, and they will use it. The idea of using CO2 reduction is a Dr. Strangelove complete madness idea. If a microbe was produced which could remove enough CO2 for the sort of things they want, life on this planet would end, because we only have to go down to 150 parts per million and plants can no longer respire. So that would be the end of life. We're on 400 parts per million. However, there's a good point, or kind of an optimism against that such theories will never work, because there's 50 times more CO2 dissolved in the ocean than there is in the air. You can work as hell as you like removing CO2 from the air, pumping it into anything you want, storing it, freezing it, turning it into trees, but the balance will be rebalanced by CO2 emitted from the oceans, and you've got 50 times in there. So the CO2 control theories idea are complete, absolute nonsense promoted by money-making opportunists.
Nick, come back on that.
Well, no, I mean, I just think preventing extra rainforest destruction in the Amazon is a mode of CO2 reduction, because you're actually stopping a process that currently sequesters large amounts of carbon, and there has been a lot of success in that. Come back to the co-benefits point, that you're protecting the environment, the forest environment, as well as helping with carbon dioxide reduction. Whether the carbon reduction technologies, you're going to see more of them, I'm afraid. There's going to be more debate about them. Nobody's decided on them. There's a lot of sort of political nervousness about it. Piers' response is perfectly reasonable. It looks like science fiction. Why on earth are we thinking about this? And we're thinking about it because a number of people think the situation is very serious, and therefore backstop technologies have to be thought about. On the point about there are ways of actually putting extra carbon into the oceans. There's a technique called enhanced weathering, where you spread particular type of fertilizer rock on agricultural soil. Agricultural soil currently sequesters carbon, so the plants suck carbon out of the atmosphere for us. That's a natural process, and this would boost that, as well as boosting the productivity of the plants. And then that gets into the rocks, goes into the rivers, and ends up in the oceans, and ends up as coral shells and stuff like that. So it's not true that you can't put carbon into the oceans. You can. But nobody's proven this at scale. would it work at scale? What are the risks? What are the unintended consequences? Nobody knows. So, like Piers, I mean, I think it's sort of still in the realm of science fiction.
A final thought then, and a final question from me really, to both speakers. What are the implications for the planet if your side of the argument is wrong? Can I start with you, Piers?
Yeah, just on the trees issue, I like trees, I'm all for trees being grown, but the green policies are generally destroying trees. The Drax power station destroys trees in America, and the Amazon rainforest dams is also destroying trees. What happens if I'm wrong, i.e. the world isn't cooling and so forth? Well, if I'm wrong, then the world will warm, which would actually be better for agriculture than the cooling which is happening now. But I would urge you to prepare for the cooling, because the climate change theory is pointing the world in the wrong direction, just like the United Nations weapons of mass destruction pointed the world in the wrong direction.
Nick, same question.
Well, if I'm wrong, we invest a lot of money and it turns out to be not correct. I don't think that's true. I think there's a risk issue involved in this, and the risk is heavily on, the probabilities are heavily on the fact that I'm right, or that the majority of climate scientists are right. But what will happen? We'll invest a lot of money in a different energy system. We'll invest a lot of money in energy efficiency. Homes in South Wales, it's well known, are huge. The old Victorian houses that some of you here will live in are hugely inefficient, and we have to deal with that. We mustn't build homes like that anymore. We must build energy efficient homes, and that will take people out of fuel poverty. And going to a cleaner transport system will, as I've already said, benefit the residents of towns like Merthyr and elsewhere. So I think there's a better future. I don't believe it's the case that we shouldn't be combating climate change, but many of the things being proposed will have lots of other benefits as well.
Thank you, Nick. That brings our debate to a close. I hope it's given you food for thought. Please give our panellists a warm round of applause. Very briefly, if you want to do more reading on Nick's work, you can find that on understandingrisk.org, and also the website of the Tyndall Centre, which is the University of East Anglia. And Piers' information is on weatheraction.net, is that correct?
Yes, it is, weatheraction.com. And I've got a handout, a little sheet of paper for you to learn back at home, and then we'll go on our website. I'll give you out these now. Thank you.